During this class, we will basically cover three periods or three epochs in realist thinking about international relations. The first one would be like a proto-theoretical stage, or a stage where realism or political realism should be considered as a political theory or political philosophy. So it's like pre-scientific thinking. This is the record of the people who were trying to find the meaning in the history of the relations between political communities. um, and this is pretty important. Like the first very important facet of realism is what I call its historicism. So there is this idea in a realist philosophy of politics that we as a human beings, we do not change. We have the same human nature. We are governed mostly by our urges. Yeah, we have those passions. We are egoistic, and what is the most important facet of human nature would be we have this lust. We have this drive to rule over other human beings. Yeah, to have power over other human beings. And for the realist, the history of mankind is a basically history of the way this human nature, this pessimistic human nature, yeah, um, is expressing itself within different historical contexts. That's why very often you would find in a textbook or in a text generally about the realist tradition, you will find the phrase like a timeless wisdom of realism. So basically, realism tries to interpret and analyze the world as it is, and the very important part of the world of politics in general and international politics in particular. This timeless quality is bad human nature. And I will go briefly through a couple of names of the philosophers or historians uh, that are very often considered like a founding fathers of this international of this intellectual tradition. So we have Thucydides and his treatise on the Peloponnesian War. He's very often mentioned along with Herodotus as a first Western historian. Yeah? Him and Herodotus. And Thucydides wrote a book about the Peloponnesian War, the war between the two alliances of ancient Greek states. One alliance led by Athens and the second one led by Sparta. And he's trying to describe what are the reasons, what are the circumstances that made this war happen. Yeah. And in his thinking, the realists are very often trying to pick and choose a certain aspect of his thinking, and they are very often showing or interpreting his thought as an example of a situation where you have those political communities that are more or less independent from one another. There is no overarching authority that can tell them what to do, and basically draw a conclusion that whenever you have this situation, yeah, so you have those units, those actors, those political communities, they are free to do whatever they please. They will often wage war with one another. So that's like a lesson drawn from Thucydides that is very often present in also contemporary realist thinking. Now, the next philosopher or theologian, actually, St. Augustine, in his great treatise, the Civitate Dei, or Lord's State, I guess. I don't know what is the proper translation from Latin to English, but basically the idea is it's like the state of God. So he's trying to show that the less personalized our relations between human beings, the more they are governed by their egoism, by their urges and lust of power. So his idea is that although people tend to be moral when they are in relation with their, say, family members, yeah, they tend to be less moral in the relationships with for example, other members of their political community, be it like an empire or a state or a city. And then when we come to the relations between like groups of people, he's basically saying that this is like a sphere where the ethics or the breaks on bad human nature are the weakest. Yeah, that would be his idea. And he's using like three images in a similar way than after almost 2000 years Kenneth Waltz will do. You will see that the Kenneth Waltz is a very important name as far as the realist theory goes. Yeah, right now we are at the level of philosophy, we are in ancient times, but when we will talk about like more contemporary political realism as a theory of social science, of international relations, you'll see this idea of three image would be important. Next philosopher very often cited as one of the forefathers of political realism would be Machiavelli, especially the way he treats the interest of the monarch, the prince. So very often Machiavelli is this amoral guy that is giving advice to a ruler that he should be ruthless, that he should be amoral, because this is what is effective in politics. And to an extent, that's correct. Yeah, that's a part of Machiavelli's message. But on the other hand, the context in which he gives those give this advice to the prince is the context of Renaissance Italy and his hope that somebody would be able to more or less unite the plethora of small Italian states and 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 help them to be secure. There is this tension, yeah, in Machiavelli's work between the interest of the monarch or the prince and the interest of the political community that the prince is leading. And this moral tension is pretty much still present in realism, especially in what I will call classical realism. Now, the next very important philosophical figure for realism is Thomas Hobbes. In his famous Leviathan, he's trying to build like a theory of social compact. Yeah, so he's trying to say where the sovereign state is coming from, and he's basically painting this picture of the state of nature where people are insecure, they can be attacked or killed, or their possession can be stolen at any moment. So out of this fear, out of the need for self-preservation, those particular individuals get together and say basically, okay, so I'm, as an individual in the state of nature, I am willing to forego my uh, liberty to a large extent, but by doing this, I will cede my liberty to some higher organization, the state, the Leviathan. Yeah, I'm saying that I will be, if the ruler or the sovereign will give me security, I will give him my freedom. I will do what the Leviathan or what the sovereign is telling me to do. Yeah, so this idea of a political community organized within a sovereign state, present in Hobbes, uh, is the story how this state is supposed to provide the security for its members. And this notion that the operation of state is security driven is like super important leitmotif present in realist thinking as a philosophy, but also, as you will see in a moment, in the realist theories of international relations. Now, I could basically mention much more philosophers and how they are relevant for realist tradition, but the last one I want to briefly cover is is Clausewitz, and in his famous treaty on war that is still read on in military academies to this day, he's basically, among other things, is trying to show that there is a very important nexus, a linkage between both politics and war as a two activities that human communities do. And Clausewitz is basically saying that that this linkage is very peculiar. One of the most famous quotes from Clausewitz is that the war is politics by other means. Yeah, so he's saying that the politics is the art of rationally picking certain goals for the community and trying to find means to attain those goals. And for him, war is actually one of those rational means to the end of a particular community. Yeah. So although there is a moment where politics end and war starts, the aim of politics is like translated or projected onto the war. Yeah, there is no war without a certain overarching political aim that stands behind it. And this very brutal political rationality present in Clausewitz thinking is very often also something that you can find in realist theories of international relations. The last thing before we go to the presentation of the particular aspects or theories of IR that can be called realist, the last thing I want to cover is what it means to be a realism. Yeah, what realism is as an existential position. So half jokingly, yeah, we may say that the realists are those guys or gals that are basically saying, oh, we should be careful, we should watch out, the world is a dangerous place, and things can go wrong, things can be bad, yeah, and even though the things might not turn as gloom and pessimistic as realists said, he or she can still say, well, like I was warning you, so that's why the worst case scenario didn't happen. But in the end, being realist is a way to try to, on the one hand, be able to say something about the real qualities of politics and how political communities should navigate those realities, but also having in mind a certain norms or qualities of the political community that a particular realist as a person is coming from. So basically Polish realist and American realist and Nigerian realist, they all will be a little bit different because they are coming from different political communities. But what would make them alike, though, is their dedication to perceive the world of international politics as it is. The beginning of realism as a proper um, theory of international relations is very much connected with the outbreak and end of the Second World War. Your typical textbook tale is that after the First World War, liberal worldview triumphed, create along with the belief in international organizations, international law, and the power of public opinion. Those were the ideas of the liberal that were supposed to create a world where the next great war will not happen. But then the Second World War happened. And after the Second World War, this distinctively conservative way of thinking about the social reality of international politics called realism emerged. And those classical realists that were working just after the Second World War, they were saying, look at those liberal idealists during the interwar period. They were naive, they were utopists, yeah? Their solutions didn't work. Now you need to listen to us, realists, because we see the world as it is, and we will teach you about the power, we will teach you about balance, we will teach you about spheres of influence, national interests, great powers, and the like. And if you listen to us, well, the international politics might be a little bit better than it was. Now, still, I have mentioned this problem or this facet of realism as an existential position, yeah, that it tend to be very pessimist. Yeah, the worldview of a realist is very gloomy. And in a sense, the if you would be 100% realist, you would be just depressed. Yeah. And thus, in every realist, there is a little piece of this idealist as well. And this is the question posed, or the problem posed to a large extent by Edward Carr in his 1939 book, The 20 Years Crisis, uh, often quoted as a first realist piece on international relations, yeah, within like the academic discipline. And Carr is basically saying, yeah, that yeah, we can and we should be realists, because without realism we are naive, but without certain ideas that drive us forward, like being realist doesn't have any sense. Like, there is no drive behind it. There is only this pessimistic outlook of history endlessly repeating itself. The next problem or aspect of the classical post Second World War realism is its focus on the human nature as a root of people's behavior in international politics, most often attributed to Hans Morgenthau, another very important early realist theorist of IR, who is basically saying that as a theorist, he's looking for eternal laws of politics that are rooted in the human nature. And this idea that you can actually find those laws in the human nature, well, it was a certain metaphor for him. He was not looking for those laws of human nature in the way, for example, a chemist is looking for laws governing like different reactions between elements. It was more of a metaphor, let's say. But it had certain problems farther down the road of political realism as a scientific theory of IR, because those classical realists and Morgenthau first among them were often criticized for being, yeah, philosophical. Yeah, it's not a proper science if you start with human nature. You need to start with empirical facts and then basing on them try to look for those general laws. Yeah, so this is like you may perceive the classical realism as this transitory period between realism as a philosophy and realism as a theory of social science. Now the classical realists are mm, criticized by next generations that they are only about this human nature, but that's not necessarily true. This view and this critique of basing your theory on human nature comes from Kenneth Walt's book Man, the State and War from 1959, where he's looking for the causes of war on three distinct images of international relations: on the level of individual, on the level of political community, and on the level of international system. And Waltz was basically saying that, like if you want to have proper scientific theory, you should focus on the systemic level. Hence, both the level of individual and political community slash state, they are important, but not that important, and especially this individual level have certain problems. Yeah, and he, by doing that, he also like started this critique of classical realists, that they are not scientific. Now, very important though, a very important aspect of classical realism that is still relevant today, when we think about political communities, or when we think about political units, the states, we very often try to measure or gauge their qualities, their capabilities, the resources that are at their disposal, resources that those states can transform into the ability to control other states, for example. Yeah, and here you have this graph where I projected those very typical sources of national power into two axis. Basically, one is between materialistic and intersubjective. So, how much a certain aspect of national power can be perceived as something super solid, yeah, something that we can touch, that we can lick, that we can smell, something materialist. And on the other hand, how those qualities can be something intersubjective, that is in our heads, yeah, that is like some ideas, some ideologies that drives us, or some kind of immaterial bonds that glue communities together, basically the intersubjective uh, quality. And then the other axis is how much a particular power resource is stable or changing within a given time frame. And we have geographical localization of a state, the natural resources at its disposal, how strong is how strong are its economy and military, how many and how good quality is the state's population, what is the national character of the people that compose that these states composes of, how good or how efficient is its government, how shrewd and smart are the diplomats working for the international relations of this particular country, and in the end, what is the national morale, yeah, how much the people of a particular country are standing behind the policies of their government. And those sources of national power, they are like a trope that is like all the way from 19th century geopolitics, um, comes to the classical realist thinking about the state. Yeah, so if we have state, the state would have those certain qualities, yeah, the ones that you have on this graph, and those qualities are the sources of national power. So states can act in international politics based on how much of those resources are at the state's disposal. Another thing very important for classical realists was a certain ethics of responsibility, or the category of states person. In my presentation, you still have stateswoman and statesman. Probably it should be statesperson. And now the ethics of responsibility. So very often you will hear or you will read about classical realism that the vision of political leadership from this perspective is this amoral person that is just hell-bent on getting more and more power for himself or herself or for their political community. It's kind of unfair picture of classical realism. So in their view, in the view of classical realism, uh, the state person is driven by the ethics of responsibility. So they have their political communities to take care of, to nurture them, to make them safe from harm. And biggest um, that's the biggest goal, that's the biggest interest that the state person should be able to realize. Only because of this responsibility, the state person can actually commence immoral acts. But it's not for the sake of this person's lust for power. No, it's only for the sake of the political community. And even still, yeah, it doesn't mean that the morality or ethics are irrelevant in politics, only that they are less relevant than the good of the political community, particular political community that the state person serves. And in a sense, this all turns into the question of lesser evil. Yeah? So very often, a state person making decisions for the sake of their political community uh, are presented with different choices. So the best this person can do is actually choose the less evil, less immoral one. Another important facet of classical realism, and this is something we all do basically in our everyday conversation about international politics, is the personification of the state. So you see, when you read about international politics, you will very often find phrases like Poland is afraid of Russia, or Russia is aggressive, or United States hegemony is greedy, or Germany is undecided. Yeah? Very often you will find those situations where the manner of speaking is that we talk about the state as though we would talk about a person, a human being. And now, is it just a manner of speaking, or is there something, important there? Generally speaking, talking about the state as though it would be a person is just a way to be able to convey very complicated messages through a metaphor much quicker and easier. For example, yeah, I could say the member of Polish political elite responsible for the creation of Poland's foreign policy perceive the perceive certain speech and acts by Russian politicians as something that can bring harm to Poland. And you see how many words did I just use? Yeah. But then I can say Poland is afraid of Russia. And as long as we personify the state in our everyday speech, yeah, when we will say that states have responsibilities or they have mental states like fear or happiness or whatever, if we remember at the back of our heads that we are talking about pretty complex social and political phenomena, and we are just using this metaphor of states as person, that's okay. Yeah, we all basically want to communicate in an efficient and economic manner. Yeah? The problem is where we actually start to treat states as people. Yeah? It can lead to many different weird ideas about what should happen in international politics. I won't go into details about it right now. So the last very important facet of classical realism as a theory of IR is that actually those were the realists that invented the theory as a core of the discipline. Yeah, so we have this science of international relations. It basically appeared after the end of the First World War at the beginning of 1920s. But only in the beginning of 1950s, after the Second World War, those realists said that, yeah, if we want to have like a proper science, we will need to have like a proper theory. And we, the realists, are best suited to provide for this theory, so we have a proper science. The paradoxical thing is, though, that their idea that the theory is so important was hijacked during the so-called second great debate, and those classical realists that were very close to philosophy, they were close to international law and history, yeah? um, their ideas about how theory is so important were hijacked by proper behavioral social scientists of IR. Those guys that wanted to put a lot of statistics, that want to do some formal models like game theory, rational choice theory, all this like super social scientific stuff that nobody besides them understood properly. Yeah, which is just I'm saying this as a footnote, so you have a little bit of a grasp of how the realism as a theory IR developed within the discipline of international relations throughout the time. So neorealism was the second stage of realist thinking in IR. One could argue it was the first properly scientific stage of thinking, and there are many scholars that could be branded neorealists. I will focus on two of those guys because they are the most important and their work is best well known, and also it gave like the momentum for the neorealism. Yeah, so whereas the classical realism have those roots in like philosophy and history, neorealism is just is just trying to say similar things but through the language of social sciences. And to do that, uh, in 1979, mentioned already, Kenneth Waltz published his theory of international politics, where he tried to give like a structural explanation of the behavior of the states within the uh, anarchical system of world politics. Yeah? And this notion of anarchy is like a key feature for neo-realists. Just as human nature was so important for classical realism, yeah, the anarchy for neo is like a core tenet of neo-realism. And now, what this anarchy is? So, Mm, international anarchy is this ideal type, this very strong and potent metaphor for standing for the qualities of international politics itself. And here, anarchy shouldn't be understood as this Hobbesian state of war where those cavemen are smacking one another with giant clubs. Yeah, that's absolutely not the case. Nah, here, the anarchy is certain formal quality of the political system. That is, the system is composed of the states or political communities that are independent from one another, that are sovereign, and that they have no higher authority above them, which means that if state want to prosper, if state want to be secure, there is no policeman, or there is no doctor or no social worker that the state can go and say, look, I need your help. Yeah, the states are left to fend for themselves within anarchy because there is nothing higher than them. And the the system, or the proper definition of the system, or for walls, is composed of three layers. Like the definition have three parts. So the first is ordering principle. This is the anarchy we talked about a moment ago, the lack of supreme political power within this system. Yeah? Now, second one is the quality of the systemic actors. Here, the states. So there are two qualities of states that Waltz is saying are relevant for his theory. First, that every state fulfills the same functions. So every state have the same institutions, will have some kind of political center of governance. It will have some army. It will raise taxes. Yeah, and as far as the functions within the system goes, every state is the same. But what is also very important is that the motivation of each state within anarchical system is the will to survive. Yeah, states don't want to commit suicide. They want to survive and not be dominated by some other states. The last level, or the last aspect of the definition of structure for walls, is distribution of capabilities. And those capabilities are basically what we call the sources of national power back when we were talking about classical realists. Yeah, so some kind of power of army, strength of economy, endowment in natural resources, how big the state is, how much population does it have, all this jazz. Yeah, those. And now, what is important? Yeah, if you uh, look at the international system, you see those empty vessels of state that are basically unlinked with one another, that they are all independent from one another, and this distribution of capabilities is filling those vessels with different levels of liquids. Yeah? And the more liquid this particular vessel, be let's say glass, yeah, the more liquid is in this glass, the higher it is in the hierarchy of power within the system. So you see, we started with the principle of anarchy, saying that from the formal perspective, there is no supreme authority over independent states that fulfill the same functions, and they are all are willing to survive. But there is a hierarchy created from the distribution of capabilities. Yeah, how much raw stuff of power they have at their disposal, and this distribution will make certain states be higher than other states. Yeah, but still without changing this ordering principle of anarchy. Yeah, so even if one state is like a almost fully filled glass and other have only couple of drops of liquid on the bottom, yeah, in the end formally they are both independent, although of course the one that is filled can do something to the one that have a very little liquid in. Now, from this image of anarchical self-help system, yeah, where states vie for survival against one another, Waltz is drawing very important consequence about the behavior of states. He's basically saying that such a system will force those states to balance against one another so they can fulfill their will to survive. Yeah, and by balance he means two things. It's either internal balancing, when the state is like a bodybuilder. Yeah, the state is hitting the gym, like doing some push-ups, using some training equipment to have strong muscles and basically be able to fend for itself. And that would be internal balancing. Yeah, so I'm getting ready to be able to fight everyone. Now, on the other hand, there is the in external balancing, which means that, okay, I may not hit the gym all that much, but I will look to have friends. And so I will look for other states that have similar interests to mine, maybe states that are afraid of some other states that I'm also afraid of. Yeah, and we will get together, pool our resources, and hope that it will be enough to enable our survival. Now, as you see, the power within such a system stems from this hierarchy based upon the distribution of capabilities. And this is called structural power. Yeah, so we have the interactions between states, and those interactions generate the system of international politics as an anarchical self-help system. The more of those capabilities states have, the higher it's within hierarchy, and from its place in this hierarchy of capabilities drives its influence on other states. You can imagine it like a force of gravity. On the other hand, we have this notion of relative power, and this notion of relative power is basically the ability of one state to tell other state to do what is in first state interest. Yeah, and there is very unclear transition from either a structural power or those sources of national power, the capabilities, into the relative power. And further down the lecture, I will try to tell you more about the problems or the concerns related to how the power as a resource is translated into the power as an ability to control. Now, the last comment about Walt's brand of neorealism is that he was styling, his theory on the classical economics. He really tried very hard to talk about those things that classical realists and political philosophers of realism tried to talk as well before. He tried to talk about all those things using language, modern language of economics and systems theory. Yeah, and he done that because he tried to show how his thinking, how his theory is properly scientific, basically better than what have been said by earlier generations of realists. Another very important neorealist is Robert Gilpin. He's most famous for his work from 1981, War and Change, where he tried to link the changes in the capabilities of particular states to the question of hegemony within the international system. His idea basically was that hegemons are very similar to products on the market. So you can see a pattern here. Yeah, another neorealist and another economic metaphor or economic language. Yeah, so probably most of you seen it somewhere. You have this graph called the life of product. So you basically have this firm or a corporation that is like having a great R&D, right? And they are able to figure out new and awesome products that everybody wants to buy and use. Yeah. And now, because of this certain quality of being innovative, a certain firm can create a product, and because it's so innovative, everybody wants to buy it. This firm have a strong position on the market. But along the life of the product, other firms in the same market are trying to basically do something similar or outright copy the product. Yeah, and because of that, the prices of this product drops, and others are able to profit from this initial idea from the product coming from this innovative company. Yeah, and so at the beginning of the life of product, the company that was able to introduce this product is like reaping all the benefits, but it also have costs. Yeah, it needed to have this awesome research and development department, and you need to pay those scientists, right? So those were the costs. Yeah, but as long as this product is innovative, there are no cheap knockoffs, nobody is trying to create similar products. Yeah, this company can reap the benefit and have like very good position on the market. Yeah, and Gilpin is saying that states, the hegemonic states, are basically similar to products in a sense. So there is this quality, there are certain qualities within the states that make them strong, that make them powerful, that make them better than other states within the system. And those qualities very often will enable a particular state to rise to the lofty level of hegemon. And then once this state is the hegemon, it can create the rules of the game for its own interest. So, for example, once the Great Britain became a global hegemon, probably at the turn of 18th and 19th century. Yeah, Great Britain, where UK was forcing free trade as a model of global economical interactions. Why? Because those products created in Britain were the cheapest, have the best quality, and gave Great Britain basically very good capital margins. And the whole system of free trade was created because it was in the benefit of UK. But if you are the hegemon and you create this system, those rules of the game that are initially in your favor, other participants of the game at some point can learn those rules of the game and start using those against you. So if you don't keep your innovative edge, if you are unable to find some new quality that enables you to stay on the top, you are in a very problematic position because you have those rules in the game that you yourself created for your own benefit, but you need to pay certain costs for those rules to keep on going. And others are starting to use those rules against you, like in the life of the product metaphor, those other firms creating like similar products or cheap knockoffs are basically profiting from your marketing campaigns or your research and development that enabled you to create the product in the first place. It's very similar with the hegemony in international relations. And right now we have this situation where United States were a global hegemon for so long, basically since the end of the Second World War. And the globalization, the creation of global worldwide market with free trade and free capital flows was something that was beneficial to United States, at least at the beginning. But now look at China. China was able to learn the rules of the game and use them for its own advantage, for its own growth, right? To the point where now the US is afraid that the China will basically pose a challenge to its hegemony. Yeah. So this rise and fall of the hegemon have a lot to do with like certain innovative capabilities of the particular state. The Gilpin's theory about the hegemony and hegemonic war, yeah, because that's a very important question. When you can have the transition between one hegemon to the other, like you had transition between Great Britain and US as a leading world's power. Yeah, there was no major war between United States and Great Britain since 1812 or 1814 war. Now, the transition from one hegemon to other was peaceful for some reason. But if we look at the situation where, for example, Nazi Germany started Second World War, and believe me, the Germans were trying to at the time, the Nazi Germany tried to attain world hegemony. This transition or this potential transition would not be peaceful. Yeah, they started a world war, right? They failed. They were unable to become a new hegemon. But still, like this struggle between like old hegemon and the challenger became bloody. Yeah. And this is like an important question of the so-called power transition theory that builds upon Gilpin's ideas. It's very often used to theorize and talk about contemporary United States-China relations, for example. Yeah, and there are many qualities of both states taken into the consideration to determine whether there will be war between the hegemon of the or and the challenger, or what would facilitate like the peaceful change on this level. Now, to wrap up the neo-realism, developed form of this brand of realist theory of international relations, it's like final or adult form was two types of neo-realism. One was offensive and one was defensive. So the offensive realism was saying that mm, proper motivation of state is not only its survival, but it is power maximization. So the states want to attain as much power as possible, and potentially they want to become the the last state on earth. Yeah, the state that will rule all other states, basically, to create a world empire. Now, the defensive realists are saying no, states don't have such a grand motivations. They mostly want to maximize their security. They want to do everything in their power to provide to survive, to provide security for themselves. Now, very often the defensive realism is linked with Kenneth Waltz that we talked about, the very figurehead of offensive realism is John Mersheimer. He is a neo-realist theoretician, and he is right now very famous for I guess helping out Russian propaganda with giving excuses for Russia's invasion on the Ukraine. It also shows that although neo-realist generation of realist scholars tried to be like super scientific, yeah, they wanted to be objective, they wanted to base their theories on facts and the like. This very famous realist theorist, Mersheimer, he's actually taking a very normative, I guess, stance, saying, we shouldn't blame Russia for its aggressive behavior, it's not Russia's fault. Yeah, so that's uh, that's a good, I guess, that's a good way to show that we shouldn't believe too much in the science of international relations. Yeah, at least this version of science that was pursued by the neo-realist. The last stage, or the last epoch of development of realist IR theories is neoclassical realism. Now, I told you that the classical realism after the Second World War happened just because of the Second World War. Yeah, that this historical event give made the classical realism popular, so to speak, trendy. Yeah, and it's very similar with neoclassical realism. So there was this very serious scientific criticism of neo-realist theories that they were unable to predict the end of Cold War. Yeah, and if we talk about proper science, science should help us to be able to predict things. Yeah, the neo-realists were claiming they are also scientific, but look, they weren't even able to predict such a momentous event as the end of Cold War. Yeah, that was a very, very widespread criticism of neo-realism. Now, the critics go farther, saying that because those neo-realists were so preoccupied with the international anarchy and the system and the balance of power, how stuff looked at this higher level of abstraction, they forgot that there are very important qualities of states that really do impact their behavior a lot. Yeah, what kind of foreign policy will those states pursue doesn't is not derived only from their systemic placement, right? But it also have a lot to do with the qualities of their political elites, the type of political regime that this state have, and the like. So neoclassical realism then said, okay, so yeah, neorealists were wrong to focus only on the structure. We will focus both on the structure and on the qualities of the states. Yeah. What are the qualities of the states? Who is the president? If is he a madman or is she a very rational person? Yeah. Like, is it an autocratic state or is it democracy? Is it like free market polity or is it like very social polity? All those qualities basically work as a transmission belt. So you have those systemic pressures exerted on the particular state, and depending on the qualities of this particular state, yeah, it will go this way or that way or that way or that way. Yeah, the trajectory of its foreign policy will be different, and that's the most basic tenet of neoclassical realism. Yeah, so we are not forgetting about the balance of power, we are not forgetting about the anarchical system, but we are trying to empower, or we are trying to appreciate the qualities of state as an important uh, variable in our scientific thinking. And this is best represented by neoclassical realists treating the state as an extraction apparatus. How well the state as an organizational structure, as an elite works, is very important to translate those sources of national power into actual impact on the environment of the states, other states, international organization, social networks, corporations, NGOs, ethnic group, yeah, whatever is outside of this particular state. This state can influence or change as much as it has this extraction capability that enables it to take those raw resources of power and turn them into results. Yeah? And this extraction apparatus, thinking about the state as an extraction apparatus, is very important facet of the neoclassical realism, neoclassical branch of realism. Now, uh, important aspects of this extraction capability is both the ability to mobilize the nation, the population, the people. Very often, the power of ideas. Yeah. So, for example, we have this idea that the nation is important. This is something we should defend, because we, as a members of nations, different nations, but this particular one nation, yeah, we share the same language, we share the same culture, history, and those are all very important things. So to be able to defend it or expand it, yeah, we should be able to mobilize ourselves. Yeah. So here, this idea of a particular nation acts as something that mobilize a lot of individual human beings to do some collective action. The other aspect important for the extraction capability of the state is the cohesion of elites. Yeah, are the political elites of a particular states are able to basically get into agreement about certain basic goals and interests of the states, because if so, they are able to influence their power bases, their electorates, and basically make things happen. And about those two things, you can read in books and articles by Randall Schweller, if you are interested about that. Another very important thing, also connected to political elites of a particular state, is the way they are perceive their international environment. There is this interesting theory based on the prospect theory from economics and cognitive psychology. So at some point, psychologists have found a very interesting way we as a human beings think and approach the risk. So if we perceive our environment as something that is permissive, that enables us to do things that is basically good, and we have like a positive outlook of our chances, it actually makes us behave in a less risky way. Yeah, if I see a straight road ahead of me, I will not start running on this road like a madman so I can trip and sprain my ankle. Yeah, on the other hand, if uh, if we perceive our environment as something that is dangerous, that is making the chances of realizing our interests smaller, as something that prohibits us, we tend to actually behave in a more risky way. For example, let's keep to the road metaphor. If we see our road going through a swamp and we are afraid that at some point we will just drop down into the murky water and drown, we would be driven to run as fast as possible through this swamp road, so we have it at our back, basically. Yeah, so we traversed it. It was risky, but it's finally over. Yeah. And this kind of a quality of the perception of the environment is a very important aspect that shapes state foreign policy behavior. I would say that this is part of the explanation why Russia go to war with Ukraine. So basically, Russian elites started to perceive Russia's international environment as less and less susceptible to Russian interests, to the reestablishment of Russia as an empire, or reinvigoration of Russian sphere of influence. Yeah, they see that their window of opportunity is closing, so they decided to do something wild and something risky, all along prescriptions or um, explanations on the basis of prospect theory. I guess the biggest problem with neoclassical realism is that although it tries to take into the account very different factors from various levels, yeah, so like this distribution of capabilities and certain systemic concerns, and then the qualities of states, and also to an extent like psychological qualities of a particular decision makers, neoclassical realists do actually pretty poor job at explaining the linkages between those different variables. And sometimes it's hard to get a good grasp, like get an easy algorithm to analyze things.